It's the economy, stupid. The immortal words of Bill Clinton aide James Carville during the 1992 presidential campaign. The idea that it's the economy, above all else, that defines election races and outcomes. Well, we're less than 16 months out from the next presidential election. So how is the U.S. economy doing right now? Not good, says the conventional wisdom. Disastrous, say the Republicans. And they, of course, blame Joe Biden and Bidenomics.
Bidenomics is spelling a summer of suffering for every single American.
They stand up and they say, no, the economy is good. The economy is horrible.
The worst economy in 40 years. Gas prices and food prices and the rent and utility prices because of Biden economics.
Bidenomics is, having people lose their jobs.
More hardship, more suffering, and more pain for the American people.
The sky is falling. Well, actually, no, it isn't. Quite the opposite. The Republican description of our economy is inaccurate, false, for want of a better word, a lie, a big lie even. But you know what? The numbers don't lie, and the numbers, the economic data, are on Joe Biden's side, because the U.S. economy is in way better shape than just about anyone predicted a year or two ago, way better shape even than under previous presidents, both Republican and Democratic. So let me break it down for you today. Let's look at 5 key economic areas: jobs, manufacturing, growth, inflation, and wages. First up, jobs. The unemployment rate fell to 3.6% in June. It's now been under 4% for 17 straight months. That hasn't happened in more than half a century, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Employers added an average 314,000 jobs a month this year through May, plus another 200,000 last month. That's almost 2 million new jobs in the economy this year alone. In Donald Trump's 4 years in office, the economy lost nearly 4 million jobs. Yeah, but that just means Biden is benefiting from a post-pandemic bounce back, right? Wrong. We actually got all the pandemic jobs back by last summer of 2022. And in the 12 months since, we've added almost 4 million new jobs on top of that. So sorry, GOP, we've gone way beyond pandemic recovery here. Since taking office, Biden has added more than 13 million jobs to the economy, and he's created more jobs in 2 years than any other president has done in a full 4-year term. In fact, so far, he has created more jobs than the last 3 Republican presidents combined. And those job gains are being felt in heavy industries. Remember, the previous president ran as the guy who was going to bring back manufacturing.
We're here today to talk about rebuilding our nation's infrastructure. Isn't it about time? We will once again rediscover our heritage as a manufacturing nation.
But in fact, it's Joe Biden who's getting America, to borrow a phrase, to build back better. Employment in U.S. manufacturing is at its highest level since George W. Bush was president. 800,000 new jobs and $200 billion in new investments by manufacturers, fueled by Biden's new spending via the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. In fact, in a research note last week, the well-known socialist institution Morgan Stanley wrote that Biden's Infrastructure Act is driving a boom in large-scale infrastructure led by manufacturers and builders. More new roads and new homes are being constructed. In fact, Morgan Stanley says Biden's economic policies have proven so strong that the bank was forced to revise its own estimates of U.S. growth upward. So let's talk about that growth. Just today, new growth figures came out showing U.S. GDP grew at a 2.4% annual rate over the second quarter of this year. Economists had been predicting 2%, so way above that estimate. The U.S. economy is growing. And don't forget, for the past 2 years, we were fed a constant diet of recession predictions, not just on Fox, but across the entire political spectrum, the whole punditocracy. In fact, the pointy heads at Bloomberg last year said the odds of a recession in 2023 were not 80%, not 90%, but 100%. It looked inevitable, unavoidable, but it hasn't happened. Bidenomics, quote unquote, has not just prevented a new recession, it's produced a rather unique post-crisis recovery. Because the last time we had a prolonged economic crisis, the Great Recession, Barack Obama got us out of it, but it took 4 years for stocks to recover their lost ground, and it took employment more than 6 years to get back to its pre-recession peak. The Biden recovery from the pandemic has been faster and stronger. Stocks stock markets are booming, with the Standard & Poor's 500 up nearly 20% on the year, and the tech-focused NASDAQ index is up over 35%. I know what you're thinking. Isn't that growth fueling higher consumer prices? Record inflation. Not anymore. Inflation dropped to 3% in June, according to government data released earlier this month. That's the lowest level since March 2021, and just slightly higher than the Fed's ideal rate of 2%. Thanks to Bidenomics. Don't believe me? Just look at the rest of the world. Something Republicans probably don't want you to do. Because for the past 2 years, they have tried to blame Biden alone for U.S. inflation, completely ignoring that it was a global phenomenon. When U.S. inflation was high, so was the rest of the world's. And now the rest of the world is still enduring high inflation rates, but the U.S. is not. Not only does the U.S. have the highest GDP growth rate of all the G7 countries over the past 3 years by far, but also now it has the lowest inflation rate. Inflation here is less than half the rate of Germany and Italy and the UK. In fact, inflation has gone down for 12 straight months in a row. If Republicans want to say Joe Biden is responsible for the high inflation, then they obviously now say he's responsible for the low inflation, right? Right? And you know what else is now beating inflation? Workers' wages. They're going up faster than the prices of goods. Up more than 4% since last year, higher than that 3% inflation rate. And Americans are not just making more money, but saving more of it, with a study of 9 million Americans showing they had 10 to 15% more money in the bank now than in 2019. Stronger wages and savings have led to something else, a drop in income inequality. Last year, the incomes of the bottom half of earners actually grew faster than the income of the top 10%. That could be a start towards closing the insanely high gap between America's richest and poorest. So yeah, Republicans, the economy is in a terrible state if you exclude jobs, manufacturing, growth, inflation, and wages. Now, look, do I sound like a Biden press person right now when I explain this stuff to you? Yeah, maybe. But don't shoot the messenger. These are just the numbers I'm giving you. The numbers. And the numbers don't lie. And again, remember, none of this was inevitable or the norm after a crisis. It required action, leadership, tough choices. Just think about where we stood 2.5 years ago, coming out of a pandemic recession. Think about where we were last year with seemingly runaway inflation and predictions of another recession. And then look at where we are now, today. A recession avoided so far, and the lowest unemployment rate since Neil Armstrong arrived on the moon. Republicans keep using Bidenomics as an insult, but Bidenomics looks like nothing short of a miracle right now. And yet, ask Americans these days about the economy, and most of them think and say it's in really bad shape. Almost 70%, according to an Associated Press NORC survey from late last month. We see it in poll after poll, where just a tiny portion of Americans give the economy good marks. In fact, most Americans also say they think President Biden's policies are harming the economy. So why do we see this disconnect? It's a crucial question, because how people feel about the economy may well decide how they vote at the next election. Remember James Carville. Now, there are a number of possible explanations for the gap. Here are just 4 from me. Number 1, despite all the progress and genuine achievements on growth and inflation and the rest, under Joe Biden, it's not all sunshine and rainbows on the economic front. Interest rates this week went up to 5.5%, a 22-year high. 12.5 million children still live in poverty, a number that had been less than 9 million in Biden's first year in office when he had that expanded child tax credit that sadly expired at the end of that year. Thank you, Joe Manchin. 37 million student loan borrowers are about to go into repayment. They're not happy, obviously, and that's after the conservative Supreme Court knocked down Biden's plan to forgive $20,000 of their debt. And only 6 in 10 Americans, less than 2/3, say they have enough cash to afford a $400 emergency expense, according to Fed data. Now, to be fair, a lot of these troubling economic trends predate President Biden. Honestly, they predate Senator Biden. So the first reason why I think a lot of Americans have an issue with the economy is because the American economy, despite the progress and improvement on Joe Biden's watch, is still not serving a lot of Americans. Number 2, that progress and improvement has undeniably happened. Jobs, inflation numbers, growth, it's undeniably happened, but a lot of Americans don't know about it because Democrats, surprise, are just terrible messengers. They are not good at explaining to Americans in a relentless, persuasive, disciplined fashion all the things that they have achieved. And Democrats end up leaving a vacuum, which the Republicans fill with their very disciplined and very relentless attacks on the state of the economy. But number three, perhaps above all else, no matter how good the economic numbers might be, no matter how good the political messaging might be, this is a country so polarized that sometimes even undeniably good news falls on deaf ears. Ordinary people don't whip out their calculators and work out how much more or less money they have under this or that president. Sadly, they first tend to look at who that president is before they decide whether or not the economy is better off. Look at this chart from the Pew Research Center. Before January 2021, Republicans were more likely than Democrats to say the economy was in good shape. But once Biden became president, it flipped almost overnight. Democrats were the ones more likely to tout the economy, and for Republicans, the economy that under Trump was amazing, look at that line, suddenly became not amazing. But it's not just how Americans view the big picture U.S. economy either. You see the same partisan flip when Americans are asked about their personal financial health. People just feel better about their own situation when their party and president is in the White House. Imagine that. And by the way, in general, there is always this disconnect between how people feel personally and how they feel about the economy. In a Federal Reserve survey last year, 73% said they were personally doing okay financially. Admittedly down 5 percentage points from the year before, but 73% still a good number. And yet when those same people were asked how they thought the overall economy was doing, just 18% said it was good. 73% say they're fine individually, but only 18% think that the overall economy is good. That's a 55-point gap. It's what Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman, who I'll speak to in a moment, has called the "I'm okay, you aren't" syndrome. But what's behind this syndrome? Why is there this disconnect, not just between how we rate our personal financial situation versus the national economy, but in Krugman's words, the yawning gulf as a whole between public perceptions and economic reality? Well, that's number four. The media. And yes, it's true that we have a right-wing media that, in my opinion, just lies about the economy or at least deliberately downplays the good news. But the problem is actually with all the media, which of course tends to focus on bad news over good. In March of this year, 84% of Americans said they had heard bad news about the economy. Just 28% say that they'd heard good news. See, my industry excels in sharing and sometimes scaremongering about bad financial news. I mean, how often do you see reporters doing stand-ups at gas stations because prices are at record lows? My industry has also excelled in grading Republicans, and in particular Donald Trump, on a curve. Just consider how economic news was reported on under Trump versus on how it's reported on under Biden. For example, when 200,000 new jobs were added in January 2018 under President Trump, the Associated Press called that figure robust. When 210,000 jobs were added in November 2021 under President Biden, that same news outlet called that same number sluggish. But to be fair, it wasn't just the AP.
The January jobs report, it came out good. 200,000 jobs were created.
There's disappointment with only 210,000 jobs added.
A strong January labor report last week showing 200,000 jobs added.
Biden deals with a disappointing November jobs report. Only 210,000 jobs last month.
A positive employment report that showed the economy added about 200,000 jobs last month.
Only 210,000 jobs were created in November.
200,000, yay! 200,000, boo. So maybe these days it's not the economy stupid. Maybe it's the polarization stupid. Or maybe it's the media stupid. Because the economy is doing well on any traditional objective measure, growth, jobs, inflation, on any international comparison to the rest of the G7, for example. The American economy, the Biden economy, is relatively and undeniably in very good shape. The numbers don't lie. But a lot of the people you hear talking about the economy in our politics, in our media, in our public life, they're lying to you.